My name's Joe Murphy. I'm the director of the Center for Innovative Pedagogy, and I'm pleased to introduce you to Nancy Jennings and Suzanne Lovett, two of the authors of Practice for Life, Making Decisions in College. So the book draws on a 5-year study following more than 200 students at 7 New England liberal arts colleges, much like Kenyon. It examines the complex ways in which students engage and re-engage with college over their time here, learning to navigate change as adults in making decisions both large and small. Our speakers are both from Bowdoin College, where Nancy Jennings is Associate Professor of Education Emerita, and Suzanne Lovett is Associate Professor of Psychology. I don't want to eat up too much of their time, but I do want to thank Dean of Students Janet Lohman for connecting us with Suzanne and Nancy. And I also want to mention that CIP hosts 2 book clubs every summer, and Practice for Life will be one of our titles this summer, so take good notes and you'll look smart in the book club. And you'll get an email about that later this week. So please help me welcome Nancy Jennings and Suzanne Lovett.
So thank you, Joe and the Center for inviting us. We're really thrilled to be here, and thank you, Janet and the Dean of Students Office for hosting us. We're really thrilled to be here. It's been very welcoming so far. I'm thrilled to see students in the audience. How many students are here? There are a few over there, I think. Yeah, so we don't usually have a lot of students come to our talk, so it'd be really great to hear the student perspective on what we're going to talk about. So as Joe said, we're going to talk about Practice for Life, Making Decisions in College, part of a pretty large longitudinal study that followed over 200 students in the class of 2010 throughout their entire college experience and then after college. Nancy and I, along with 2 colleagues, so Lee Cuba and Joe Swingle, both at Wellesley, wrote a book that summarizes some of what we learned through this project. So let me just give you an overview of the talk. So we're going to start with providing some background information about the larger study on which the book is based. Although the original goal of the project was to learn about students' transition to college and then their transitions within college, what emerged really early on was the criticalness of understanding how students make decisions, how they respond to decisions, both the large ones and the small ones, and how they respond really, we learned, shape their college experience. In the book, we look at 5 areas of decision making, and we'll just touch on all 5 just a teeny bit today, but we're going to focus mostly on advice and academic engagement. And at the end, we'll conclude with some questions that we're still talking about, hashing out, and hopefully we might have a discussion at the end. We've left time for discussion to talk about these questions that we're going to raise at the end. Okay. So first, just the background. So as Joe mentioned, our results come from this large longitudinal study. It was conducted by what we ended up calling ourselves New England Consortium on Assessment and Student Learning, or shortened to NECASL. So 7 selective liberal arts colleges in New England were part of this project. 5 were co-ed, so Bates, Bowdoin, Colby, and Middlebury. 2 were single-sex, Wellesley and Smith. And in the summer of 2006, each college identified 36 students to be interviewed throughout their entire college career. We interviewed them 3 times in their first year and 2 times every year after that, including when they were on study away. We also conducted surveys of the entire class of 2016 at all these colleges because we wanted to make sure what we were learning from the interviewed samples matched what we learned from the entire class. And we found that there was strong connections between the survey data and the interview data. I'm just going to focus on the interview data today, but we did find common themes throughout both. So the students we studied, as I said, we started with 36, but we had a really large sample at the beginning. We started with 255 students. We did have some attrition, but by senior year, we still interviewed 77% of those students that we started with. It was a race-stratified random sample, and as you can see at our schools, we did oversample for students of color, really wanted to understand their experience. About 2/3 of the sample were female, almost 2/3 were on financial aid, so again, we ended up oversampling for that, and about 1/3 of the students were first-generation students. So when we interviewed the students, we asked about all aspects of their life. So we asked about their academic experiences, we asked about their social experiences, their personal experiences, and then we also asked them to talk about what their goals were and their aspirations, and also to self-reflect a little bit on what was going on with them. Because we had the luxury of interviewing students every semester, we asked them to reflect on what happened in the prior semester and what they hoped would happen in the next semester. But we spent most of our time asking them about the current semester, what was going on at the moment, and we really wanted to capture the immediacy of their college experience. And we also learned that when we asked them to talk about what happened last semester versus the future versus now, the stories didn't always line up very well, so students would tend to reinvent their narrative as they went along. So we really learned it was important to ask them what's going on now. Okay. So as I mentioned, what emerged from the data was the importance of decision making. College students have to make lots of decisions, often in the face of ambiguity, about their academic, social, and personal lives. We all tend to focus on the big decisions, the ones that happen infrequently, like declaring a major, deciding about study abroad or off-campus study, but tend to give far less attention to the informal ones that happen almost every day, like deciding to talk to a professor after class, or choosing to have dinner with somebody you don't really know that well instead of your roommates. Yet we found that all of the decisions that students make have the potential to shape their experience at college. What's important about decision making is not solely, or even most importantly, the outcomes of the decisions, but how students approach the decisions they had to make. Students can see decisions as opportunities to change, reflect, grow. So for example, if I choose to eat with someone I don't know very well, I may find that she's really different from all my friends, but I may find that I actually really enjoy interacting with somebody who's really different, and maybe then I even learn something about myself through this interaction. Or we found that students can see decision-making as an obstacle course, for which the best approach is avoidance to minimize risk. So thinking about, should I talk to this professor after class because I'm really not understanding at all what's going on, and then maybe worried, well, if I do, are they going to think I'm stupid? So maybe I won't do that, and maybe I'll just sort of struggle through and try to manage it on my own. So seeing decisions as opportunities to learn about yourself also allows for restarts. So decisions as restarts, for changing course, going down a different path, whether it's social, so students might decide that they need to stop hanging out with simply the members of their team and start to interact with other kinds of students. Personal, they're in a club, not that interesting, but it's taking up way too much time. Maybe it's time to leave that club. Or academic, so thinking yourself in one way, I'm pre-med, and then coming to realize I don't really like science, so maybe I need to change my course. So in other words, seeing decisions as opportunities, students can find themselves caught up in this process of self-creation and then recreation. In the book, we argued that students don't just start college and then finish it. They start and then restart college many times. So as I said, the book focuses on 5 areas of decision-making: managing time and balancing commitments, making and keeping friends, establishing a sense of home, learning how to ask for personalized advice, and figuring out how to become a lifelong learner and find meaning in work. So although we're happy to talk about any other aspects of the book, as I said today, we're going to focus on advice and becoming engaged. Okay, so first, we'll focus on advice. Okay, so in the senior year, we asked students to describe what was an ideal advisor. And here's what Paige said. Paige said, someone that's open-minded and in tune with what you want, but also will give you guidance. And also someone that cares about what you're doing and will use their experiences to help you with that. In terms of my advisors here, I find that in them. I haven't spent as much time with them, with my advisors, as I should, but I think that's on my side. They're not supposed to be like, oh, come meet with me every day. I'm supposed to be the one initiating that, and I haven't as much as I should. So like Paige, we found that most seniors describe their current faculty advisor as ideal. They were available, supportive, caring, interested in them, and provided constructive feedback. But even as Paige alludes to, these relationships took time to establish, they took effort, and they took commitment on the student's part. So this was hard work to build these relationships, and not all students thought it was worth the effort, especially when they were new to college or when they perceived a mismatch between their own academic interests and their advisor's area of expertise. So I'm going to show you 2 quotes from Sarah. So Sarah was asked to talk about her experience with her first-year advisor, and Sarah said, he doesn't really advise. I met him once at the beginning of the year, And then after that, I just emailed him and asked for my PIN. He emailed it back to me, and I can just take the classes I choose or drop the classes I choose, which is kind of nice because I don't have to do anything. But at the same time, I wish someone would tell me something, like any type of guidance. So we asked her to talk more about her first-year advisor, their experience, and she said, as she describes this person, they put me with this really strange advisor, someone in the philosophy department. I have no idea why. I mean, he's nobody who I would probably want to take any of the classes that he teaches, so it wasn't really applicable to ask him advice. So why are these advising relationships sometimes challenging for students? First off, we found that they're often different from what they experienced in high school. So some students in high school had little or no formal advising. One guidance counselor may advise hundreds of students. So advice was either non-existent or it was obtained elsewhere, a teacher, an administrator, or mostly parents. So in high school, they really were turning to the parents. Others at more resourced high schools had formal advising that was all-encompassing. They could talk to their advisor about most anything and met with their advisor at least once a day. But these students, when they got to college, were surprised at how hard it was in college to establish the kind of relationships they had had in high school. And mostly it was because their advisor was no longer just right down the hallway, that they could just pop in and chat with them. In college, we connect students and advisors somewhat artificially. And at the first meeting with the advisor, who, is a total stranger, that first meeting is typically focused on selecting courses. There's often no time to really get to know each other or to define the relationship. So from the student's point of view, what kinds of things can I talk to my advisor about? Is it just about course selection? Is it okay to talk about not liking the way someone teaches? Or problems with my roommates? Or that I feel so homesick? Some students really want to talk about it all, but others really only want to talk about courses, and then we found there are some students who just want to be left alone. And then from faculty, it's equally all over the place. So they have the same kinds of differences in how they approach advising. Some are really happy to talk about the teaching style of other faculty, but some absolutely won't go there. Some faculty are delighted to get into the murky areas of students' personal and social experiences, while others really are only comfortable talking about courses. And also with some faculty, some just kind of sadly want to be left alone. But even when colleges, and at my college, tried really hard to help faculty and students define these relationships, gave them guidelines, ultimately the individual faculty and the student have to negotiate what that relationship is going to be all about, and under really intense time pressure. And we think because these relationships are somewhat ambiguous and expectations are unclear, the default model can be one of advisor as a bureaucrat. Just give me my PIN so I can register. And that was Sarah's experience with her first-year advisor. Another problem we saw was the mismatch that can occur between the student's intended major and their advisor's department. And that also was illustrated with Sarah. We found that actually sharing a common academic experience, a common academic interest, can provide a handy tool to start conversations, something concrete to talk about, but we found that a shared academic interest was neither necessary nor sufficient for establishing a meaningful relationship. And because only some students get advisors in their major, and because we place so much value on finding your major, a first-year student who didn't get that match tended to devalue that initial relationship. They wanted a specialist, but instead got someone who really is just a generalist. They wanted someone who specialized in their field. That's not what they got. So the resulting devaluation blocks off the opportunity to learn how to form good relationships, something that haunted some students throughout their entire career, never being able to develop a strong relationship with any faculty. And I'm going to tell the story of Sam. So Sam was one of these students who never connected with any of his advisors, even though every faculty person he had in his advisor was in his intended major. Okay, so Sam, we call it going it alone. And we started with his high school experience. So prior to coming to college, Sam had advisors in high school. They had Guidance counselors supervise a limited number of students, but that relationship was really tenuous. Sam, and as an example, didn't appreciate their advice about the colleges to which he should apply. And our interviewer asked him once he learned, where he had got accepted, if his counselors were to blame for the fact that he was only accepted at 2 of the 18 colleges to which he applied. And Sam says, well, it would be easy for me to say yes. A part of me wants to say yes, but I don't think that's true. I think that's just a way of saying it's not my fault. And I realized afterwards that I was kind of upset with my counselors because they were very dismissive. I don't want to say they were like, you're not getting in. Maybe they were more realistic than anything. But I think maybe at that point, I wanted someone to be more of a cheerleader than a college counselor. And maybe I'm a little bitter about that. So Sam's first-year advisor was also his professor in his political science course, which was great because he wanted to, quote, establish this relationship, this connection now with someone in his major. But the relationship quickly stalled because the course was not what he expected it would be. Sam only met with her for course registration, and even then, it was only to tell her what courses he was going to take, rather than to ask for advice. Sam later reflected that if he had, quote, a better relationship with her, I probably would have sought her help more. So then Sam declared a major in political science and chose a professor to be his advisor, but he chose someone he had actually never met before. When asked, do you want to have close relationships with your professors? Sam said, quote, I guess somewhere within me, I feel like I need something to justify talking to the professor. But that isn't the case. I mean, you should go strike up a relationship with them so that you see each other as people as opposed to professor and student. So you better understand each other, and I haven't taken advantage of that, and that's not good. By the end of his junior year, Sam had only met with his advisor twice, and it was only to talk about, quote, logistical stuff, like my gen ed requirements. I always email him like 12 hours before the deadline. Here are the classes I want to take. This is why I want to take them. Please release my hold so I can register. As he started his senior year, he was we asked students, what are you most looking forward to your senior year? And Sam was, quote, getting my thesis over with. So Sam's meeting with his major advisor about his thesis started off rather bumpy. Sam said, we haven't had the most open communication in terms of what his expectations are and what I'm providing. I feel a lot of times it's like we're talking on different radio waves. So although Sam and his advisor actually had to meet every week to talk about his thesis, they never developed a strong relationship. And Sam said when he was done with his thesis that his big regret was never feeling that sense of attachment towards it that he knew other students had. So as a senior, towards the end of the year, we were asking students about their regrets and to talk about their past. And Sam, this is my favorite quote, I think, in the book, said, one professor said that I was impervious to criticism. I don't know if she meant it as a compliment or not, but I like to think it was a compliment. So it's really hard to tell with Sam if his reluctance to consult with faculty was because he just didn't want to hear what they had to say. He wanted cheerleaders, not advisors. Or because he didn't think they were going to be able to provide him with anything really important. In either case for him, advising was a series of missed opportunities. He never practiced asking for advice, so he never learned how to seek advice in college. He approached advising as an obstacle course, for which the best plan was to limit face-to-face meetings, limit contact altogether. Because he never let anyone get to know him, he never had the opportunity to learn what they might have to offer. So I'm going to turn it over to Nancy now. She's going to talk about engagement.
Thank you. We're not going to talk about this data today, but we also interviewed these students 1 year after graduation and 5 years after graduation, and we've just started to sort of analyze the 5-year-out data. It was done last summer. But it's really interesting with advising and looking at Sam. A lot of these patterns that build up in college play out 1 year and 5 years out. People that are still struggling to figure out how do you seek advice from people or how do you become engaged in work. So, it's interesting. We need to do more work on looking at how that sort of plays out. As Suzanne said, Sam never felt that attachment to his thesis or to his advisor as he knew some of his other friends were. And so he's a really good example in some ways of how detaching from advising also affects the engagement that he had with academic work. We used as indicators of engagement things such as when students talked about specific assignments or professors or courses as loving them or exciting their passions, or they said they talked to friends and family about something that happened in a course or in an assignment we had. We took those as the indicators of engagement. Specifically when students talked about devoting more time to a particular assignment or a particular course, we saw that as a really good indicator of engagement. So in short, we don't terribly well define engagement, but we saw academic engagement as occurring when students focused on acquiring or creating new knowledge, were intrinsically motivated to learn, and derived pleasure from doing so. And because we had this luxury of talking to students each of their courses and various other academic experiences every semester, we came to realize that the defining nature of engagement is its particularistic nature. Engagement is linked to specific classes or assignments or professors or pedagogies or methodologies. For instance, a student might be totally engaged by the readings and the small group work of one course, but then totally disengaged by the reading or by the large group discussions that happen in the course. As a consequence, you can't describe students, as some of the larger surveys do about engagement, as either engaged or unengaged. It's not a sort of global term. It is something that's very tied to particular events. And as one might expect, students have engaging and unengaging experiences throughout college. Once we recognize the particularistic nature of engagement, that it's not necessarily tied to big things like disciplines, but to smaller things, we found that within this particularistic nature, 3 different patterns of engagement emerged: cumulative, episodic, and sustained. So the first, I'm just going to briefly describe them and use students as examples. The first one is cumulative engagement, and this really closely resembles the kind of engagement that all of our institutions are built on, that probably all of us had at some level. That's why many of us have PhDs in these things. You just keep digging deeper and deeper. Michael's a really good example of this. He had lots of engaging experiences. He took this wide array of courses and he loved aspects of all of them. But every semester he found, when he took a physics course, that he became deeper engaged in that physics. And the more physics he took, the more he wanted to take the next physics course. So something that started out as kind of an equal passion along, as time went on, it accumulated into a passion for a particular major. He got a prestigious internship in a lab in Austria the summer before his senior year, and that helped him clarify what he wanted to do with his honors project. He said, "My summer experience definitely makes me want to make my honors project something I'm interested in, something I feel passionate about, just as opposed to something that's assigned." And he said his honors project was the best academic experience he had in college, because it allowed him to do the whole process of research, not just an experiment, but plan the experiment and do it and get it published, seeing what it takes to do all of that. So he was engaged every semester, and in physics at least, each experience deepened his engagement. And that's Michael. But he's not the modal pattern in our study. We found many more students to be like Adam, whose college experience was just peppered with moments of engagement. And we call this episodic engagement. It doesn't happen every semester. It certainly isn't consistently sustained in any one discipline. In some semesters, one or more of his courses or an assignment or a professor may capture his interest, but in others, when he was asked what his best course was, it was the course that he was getting an A in. Adam came to college with a pretty fixed sense of what courses he needed and what his major would be. He assumed he had to major in political science because he wanted to go to law school. It's an assumption that he never checked out with his advisor, never checked out with anybody. He just assumed it was true, and something his advisor never questioned or helped him think about differently. And at first it worked out pretty well. He liked American politics course he took his first semester because it examined multiple perspectives on current issues. He liked in a political theory class he took the next semester. He liked it because they had many debates and they talked about the nature of love in class, which he said, I just didn't think that was going to happen in political theory. His real enthusiasm for political science emerged, though, in the second semester of his sophomore year in a course focused on legal case studies. And this is his quote: "I like this course because you read different cases about murder and sex crimes and just all different kinds of cases that come from common law, from England and stuff. It's like you go to the movies every time you go to class, because he talks about the cases and how they operate and stuff. And that's interesting. I think law is the most interesting." So part of Adam's excitement stemmed from the course being about law. But most of it came from Adam's sense that the course was, as he said, not just about theory, but learning content that had real implications for how he viewed society. Although not engaged in all of his political science courses in his first 2 years, at least Adam found particular aspects in most of them interesting. But by his junior year, Adam was not enthused at all. He said he felt duped into thinking that he needed to major in political science to go to law school, and he really wished that he could restart college and find another major. What they don't tell you is that your undergraduate degree, the concentration really has no merit whatsoever. It doesn't matter. Most medical students are English majors. It doesn't matter. I probably would have majored in something like sociology or theater had I known. Well, it's not true, as you all know, that most medical students are English majors. It is true that the link between post-college plans and majors is not as strong as many of our students assume, particularly first-generation students, I think. Adam's academic experience in college was guided by a decision he made even before he went to college. He found some parts of political science courses engaging, often those that had to do with real-life issues or helped him think about how societies were governed, but several were not engaging at all. So Adam's engagement was really episodic, happening some semesters in some courses, or more often just some parts of courses, but not every semester, and it certainly didn't increase as he advanced in his major. In fact, advancing in his major really dampened and lessened his engagement because it forced him to take courses he knew he wasn't going to be interested in, instead of courses that he might have found some engagement in later on. So that's episodic engagement. And the third one is a group of students who exhibited sustained patterns of engagement. They found engaging experiences every semester throughout college, but their engagement was not often linked to a discipline or to an area like cumulative engagement is. And Dan's a really good example of this. Dan loved to debate big ideas and ask big questions and was always trying to get his high school friends to engage in these debates. He was from Michigan, I think, actually, and he said, I can't go to University of Michigan because my friends already hate me for asking him to have these conversations, and they'll just hate me more for another 4 years. Initially at college, his interest led him to philosophy courses, particularly a course he took first year on the philosophy of religion, where the big questions just kept coming for Dan. Does God exist? Can you define the nature of God? Can you ultimately decide whether or not God exists? I really liked dissecting these questions and tried multiple times to start arguments with friends. So being in a class with readings and a professor, it definitely piqued my interest and really engaged me in something that I've been looking forward to taking for some time. Dan took more philosophy courses in his first 2 years in college and became really engaged by them. He liked logic and he liked environmental philosophy, courses that allowed him to think these big thoughts that he saw as helping him define his perspective on the world. He liked other courses in his first 2 years as well, in history and in English, that also raised big questions with contested answers. But by his junior year, he had to start taking courses to complete his major, and he took ancient philosophy and modern philosophical thought, and he found them very unengaging, and he was really stunned by this. In reflection, Dan came to understand that it wasn't philosophy as a discipline that engaged him, but something else. He said, I really don't care about topics that philosophy actually covers. What I care more about is reading an argument and dissecting an argument and objecting to an argument and proving it, or thinking of a new argument and coming up with an analogy. This realization led him to seek out courses in other disciplines that gave him opportunities to read about and dissect arguments and ask moral questions and develop analogies. So although engaged in at least some parts of most of his philosophy courses, Dan found completing the major something of a burden, taking him away from courses that would have engaged him more. Unlike Michael, who became more excited as he dug deeper into physics, Dan's passion was not disciplinary. It was tied to a smaller unit. It was a methodology or a way to approach a question. He sustained his engagement every semester, but across a variety of courses. So why is it important to delineate these different patterns of engagement? If you look at students like Dan and Adam at any point in time in the semester, even in any course, they could be described as being either terribly unengaged or terribly engaged, but neither would describe accurately their engagement. It's not a state of being. It's tied to a particular kind of pedagogy or a particular kind of curriculum. As an advisor and a faculty member looking at engagement at this level, not the disciplinary level or even the whole course level, but at a level of assignments or projects or readings, it gives me a much greater understanding of what actually motivates a student. More importantly, it might give the student a greater understanding of what's actually engaging them in the process. So we're going to have some questions that we really hope to talk about. And I'm going to read a lot, about these questions, but please keep your questions in mind. We'll conclude by considering some questions we believe we should be asking about advising and engagement and about the college experience more generally. Our first question concerns how to help students understand that developing a relationship with faculty, even those outside their intended major, can be beneficial. When students arrive at college having already decided on a particular path, like Adam or like Sarah to some degree, they have trouble seeing the value of an advisor outside of that path. They fail to see their interactions with their non-major advisors as providing opportunities to learn about other disciplines or to hear different perspectives on the courses that they're choosing or discover alternative paths through the curriculum. Perhaps most importantly, as opportunities just to practice interacting with faculty so that in subsequent years they could, when they do have an advisor in their specialty, they've got some practice in how to make this a productive relationship. Instead of recognizing the benefits inherent in forming any kind of tie to their advisors, they formed no ties, people like Sam. Forming even weak connections, we found, to advisors can provide students with access to important people, information, and resources outside of their own social networks. Moreover, students who developed connections to their advisors tended to have more conversations in which they were self-reflective. So they learned how to be more aware and attuned to what was actually motivating them. This leads to the next question. If engagement is much more tied to particular aspects of a course or a field for most students, are we as advisors asking the wrong questions when we want to find out more about our advisors' interests or what motivates them, what helps their learning? As an advisor, when a student would come into my office, I would often say, so what course did you like best last semester? Or what discipline what field do you think you liked the most courses in, when they were trying to figure out what they were majoring in? Neither Dan nor Adam would have answered these questions in the same way throughout the 4 years, or even in the same way throughout the semester. And asking questions at that level gave neither me nor them any insight into what their interests were. But if I had asked them instead to tell me about an assignment last semester that really motivated them, or a professor whose teaching they really liked, or a subject that even though they might not like the class, they began to find engaging, I might have gotten a much greater sense about how to guide them through the curriculum. And moreover, they might have gotten a greater sense about what they needed. Dan had to do a lot of hard work on his own in order to figure out what it was. And it wasn't philosophy. It was really these big questions that he wanted, and he needed to find in other areas. So he made it through. But Adam got stuck, and his advisor and whatever we did never helped him get unstuck because we didn't ask the right questions at some level, I think. One issue here, though, is that if we're going to ask students these finer-grained questions about assignments or types of pedagogy or ideas that engage them, then we need to develop some ways of using those questions to navigate the curriculum. You can't just ask a kid what motivates them and then say, well, sorry, I can't really help you because I don't know what other course does that. How would we advise someone who thrived in a course where they really liked it because it was about public writing, and then tried to advise them to take another course that might have some aspect of public writing in them? Or what about a student like Adam who thrived in courses where faculty members talked about real-world examples to explain concepts? How would I help him figure out what other courses to take in the curriculum? If we're serious about engagement, we have to be more nimble about figuring out how to help students make it through our curricula. And our final question is a bigger one, and it has to do with helping students see their decisions as opportunities to restart college. Students like Sam and Adam got stuck. Sam had a pattern on how he used advisors, and even when he could see that it may not be the best way, he continued down the same path. Adam didn't like political science courses, but he thought he had to major in it to go to law school. I'm sure we all have had Sam or Adams in our life, or we, as I would say, were Sam or Adams, through college. So how do we help students like them reflect on the decisions they're making, learn about themselves, and take a different tack? When students approach decisions as opportunities rather than obstacles, they can use them to make adjustments and to restart college. It's really tempting to focus on residential colleges as safe places in which to practice these adult decision-making, but it may be of greater importance that they're places that are densely populated with decisions about who one is becoming and who aspires to become. As fertile ground for a broad range of decisions, colleges are places where students can try on different selves, discard some selves, maybe pick up a self that they discarded previously. But how do we help students get there? And that's the question that still, I think, haunts us and we're still hashing over. So we'd love to hash it over with you. Thanks.